This is the story of a heavy brass-studded oak door in the private corridors of Windsor Castle. And the terrifying moment a 4-digit security code simply stopped working. What Camilla realized behind closed doors, as she stood before the king's private study and found her access permanently revoked by a stony-faced equerry, is that her reign as the ultimate gatekeeper of the British monarchy had been silently terminated. In less than a morning, the invisible wall she had spent years building around her husband collapsed, not through a screaming match or a public scandal, but through a devastatingly quiet human resources coup. Her hand-picked staff were gone, their desks entirely cleared, and a single, cold protocol update had just informed her that the reigning queen could no longer simply walk into the king's office without an appointment. What this video will unpack is the secret bureaucratic power grab Camilla attempted in order to completely isolate the monarch, and how Prince William uncovered the manipulation of his father's daily existence. We will explore the silent, ruthless retaliation that swept through the palace administration, bypassing the king entirely, and the devastating realization Camilla now faces. She has spent 30 years clawing her way into the sovereign's bed, only to discover that the institution has just surgically removed her from the sovereign's brain. To fully understand the sheer magnitude of this institutional reckoning, we must first rebuild the illusion of absolute power that Camilla had so meticulously constructed. For 3 decades, her survival and ultimate ascension relied on a singular, unwavering understanding of Charles's psychological profile. She knew that he was a man who despised confrontation, abhorred administrative friction, and heavily relied on a protective buffer between himself and the brutal realities of his position. Camilla did not just position herself as his lover or his wife, she positioned herself as his absolute filter. She systematically orchestrated an unprecedented psychological capture of the heir and eventually the king. She managed his moods, curated his reading material, and most importantly, controlled exactly who had access to his ear. Along the way, she executed the quiet, systemic erasure of anyone who threatened this monopoly. Loyalists to Princess Diana were quietly ushered out. Veteran courtiers who dared to prioritize the institution over Camilla's personal PR campaigns were slowly marginalized and forced into early retirement. She replaced them with a tightly woven network of sycophants and hand-picked allies, creating a loyalist bubble that answered exclusively to her. Camilla believed that she had Charles completely controlled, and by extension, she believed she controlled the vast ancient machinery of the British government. She walked the red carpets, projecting an image of sovereign partnership, completely unaware of the institutional outrage brewing just outside her meticulously curated fortress. This illusion of absolute control became the catalyst for her fatal overreach. What happened next was a highly classified secret maneuver designed to blur the lines between wifely support and constitutional interference. Knowing that William's power was rapidly expanding as the new Prince of Wales, Camilla quietly initiated a shadow purge. She began intercepting vital communications between the Duchy of Cornwall and the King's office. She subtly manipulated the sovereign's daily diary, double-booking his schedule to prevent him from holding private, unmonitored meetings with his own son and his sister, Princess Anne. It was a staggering exploitation of her proximity, a quiet redirection of the monarchy's operational flow to ensure that William's influence was minimized while her own visibility was maximized. The tipping point occurred when Camilla attempted to orchestrate the quiet transfer of the king's most senior and trusted constitutional advisor, a man who possessed a fierce, unyielding loyalty to the crown's continuity rather than the queen's ego. She attempted to replace him with a former public relations executive from her own private payroll. She was using the untouchable prestige of the monarchy to build a bureaucratic fortress, completely isolating the king so that every decision, every speech, and every royal deployment had to pass through her hands first. For a brief period, the secret plan worked perfectly. Memos went missing. Meetings with William were inexplicably delayed or cancelled. The king was kept entirely in the dark, surrounded by a smiling echo chamber of Camilla's creation. She assumed that because she wore the crown, no one would dare question the administrative reshuffling of the royal household. But she fatally underestimated the cold, devastatingly analytical guardianship of Prince William. Prince William does not view his father's reign as a romantic victory lap for a controversial couple. He views it as a fragile, transitional period that must be managed with forensic discipline, operating with the silent, enduring grief for a mother who was crushed by this exact same machine. William maintains a relentless oversight of the Crown's operational integrity. Weeks later, during a routine alignment of his own team with the sovereign's private office, William uncovered the paper trail. It did not take long for him to see exactly what was happening. The administrative irregularities were glaring. The king's calendar was being weaponized. Vital constitutional briefings were being intercepted by Camilla's private secretaries before they ever reached the sovereign's desk. The moral outrage William felt was not born of a petty family dispute, but of a profound threat to the survival of the institution itself. At a time when Catherine was quietly enduring her own private sacrifices to maintain the dignity of the royal family, Camilla was treating the king's constitutional duties like her own personal chessboard. William recognized instantly that if the government or the press discovered the sovereign was being actively shielded from his own heir by an unelected spouse, the constitutional crisis would be catastrophic. But Prince William did not scream. He did not storm into his father's drawing room demanding an explanation. He did not leak the story to the tabloids for cheap revenge. Instead, he utilized the very bureaucratic system Camilla thought she controlled to execute a silent, lethal retaliation. William weaponized institutional protocol. Working alongside the Lord Chamberlain and the most senior figures of the Privy Council, William executed a total sweeping restructuring of the sovereign's private office, framing it as a necessary constitutional modernization to ensure seamless continuity between the king and the heir. The execution of this revenge was a masterclass in institutional warfare. What looked like a routine human resources update was actually a total dismantling of Camilla's invisible wall. Over a single weekend, while Camilla was away at her private Ray Mill estate, the trap snapped shut. A formal directive was issued across the royal household. The king's entire private office was forcibly integrated with the Prince of Wales's operations. Camilla's hand-picked loyalists were abruptly reassigned to menial ceremonial planning roles, their access to the king's classified briefings entirely revoked. In their place, a phalanx of highly disciplined, fiercely loyal equerries and constitutional experts reporting directly to William were installed. That detail matters. That is where the story changes. By merely enforcing the existing rules of constitutional succession with ruthless precision, William trapped Camilla in an impossible corner. The psychological blow was immediate and devastating. Camilla returned to Windsor Castle on a Monday morning, entirely unaware of the administrative earthquake that had just taken place. She confidently walked down the opulent carpeted corridor toward the king's private study, ready to resume her role as the ultimate gatekeeper. But the faces were different. The atmosphere was cold. She reached the heavy oak door and entered her personal 4-digit code into the security keypad. The light flashed red. She stood there staring at the keypad in disbelief as a newly appointed senior equerry stepped out from an adjacent office. With a chillingly polite bow, he informed her that the security protocols for the sovereign's inner sanctum had been entirely updated. He handed her a crisp, formal itinerary. He explained in a tone devoid of any emotion that the king was currently in a classified briefing with the Prince of Wales, and that going forward, all private meetings with the monarch during working hours would require a scheduled appointment vetted by the Joint Operations Office. In a single bureaucratic maneuver, she had been locked out. She realized that despite the coronation, despite the titles, and despite the decades she spent manipulating Charles's mind, She was merely a temporary resident in an institution that could revoke her relevance with a stroke of a pen. The trap had snapped shut, leaving her completely exposed, humiliated in front of the staff, and entirely dependent on a king who was currently sitting behind a locked door, entirely unaware of the war his son had just won. The psychological climax of this entire palace coup did not happen at the locked oak door in front of the newly appointed equerries. It happened later that evening in the suffocating quiet of the private royal apartments, when Camilla finally secured her officially allocated time with her husband. She walked into the room carrying the restructuring mandates and the reassignment notices of her deeply loyal staff. She did not approach him as a defeated wife, but as a queen demanding the immediate restoration of her empire. She framed the sweeping human resources update not as a constitutional necessity, but as a rogue, disrespectful power grab by a jealous heir. She presented the paperwork to the king, fully expecting the man who had fought the entire British establishment to marry her would simply pick up his pen, override the Prince of Wales, and reinstate her as the ultimate gatekeeper. But Charles did not reach for his pen. For the first time in their decades-long partnership, the king looked at the paperwork, looked at his wife, and hesitated. He understood instantly the terrifying brilliance of what William had done. The restructuring of the private office was not an emotional attack. It was a flawless enforcement of constitutional protocol, legally co-signed by the Lord Chamberlain and the most senior advisors of the realm. Charles realized that if he attempted to overturn this ruling, he would not just be publicly undermining his son. He would be explicitly ordering his government to break its own strict operational codes for the sole benefit of his wife's ego. He would have to publicly declare war on the Prince of Wales, a man who now held the overwhelming majority of the public's trust and the financial keys to the monarchy. The king offered no defense. He signed no override. His devastating silence was the ultimate admission that while he wore the crown, he lacked the institutional strength to protect her invisible wall. This devastating silence forced Camilla to confront the terrifying reality of her commercial desperation. To the outside world, she appeared to be a sovereign equal, a queen, who commanded the respect of the global elite. But the brutal truth, one that Prince William understood with forensic clarity, is that her power was entirely derived from access. She does not own the royal estates. She does not control the Duchy of Cornwall, the billion-dollar financial engine that William now manages as the sole landlord. By severing her unchecked access to the king's daily diary, William did not just inconvenience her. He permanently dismantled her ability to funnel patronage, grant royal favors, and elevate her own private network. She could no longer manipulate the sovereign flow of wealth and visibility toward the Parker Bowles bloodline, because every meeting, every charity patron allocation, and every state dinner seating chart now had to be strictly vetted by a joint operations office controlled by the heir. While Camilla privately drowned in the realization that her political capital had been permanently frozen, the visual shifts in power began to manifest within the palace walls, delivering a masterclass in institutional correction. William did not gloat to the press. He did not issue a triumphant statement. He simply allowed the newly restored order of the monarchy to speak for itself. It started with subtle structural changes in the very corridors where Camilla had just been locked out. In the grand antechamber leading to the king's private study, the exact room where Camilla now occasionally had to wait for her scheduled appointments, William's team executed a deeply symbolic interior adjustment. For years, Camilla had subtly marginalized the visual history of the institution to center her own blended family. But overnight, the sprawling portraits of her private network were discreetly relocated. In their place, a magnificent, imposing portrait of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip was prominently reinstated directly in the line of sight of the waiting area. It was an unavoidable, towering reminder of the true ethos of the crown. It sent a cold, undeniable message that the monarchy is built on duty, uncomplaining sacrifice, and sovereign blood, not personal indulgence or private ambition. This visual demotion in the private quarters was instantly mirrored on the public stage by the quiet, yet deeply emotional elevation of Catherine the Princess of Wales. Throughout Camilla's long campaign to consolidate power and act as the sole whisperer to the king, Catherine had maintained a dignified distance. She never engaged in petty squabbles over office space or diary allocations, but at the very next major diplomatic reception at Buckingham Palace, the spatial and visual dynamics had been fundamentally altered by the new Joint Operations Protocol. Camilla no longer dictated the flow of the room. She was entirely separated from the king's briefing circle, relegated to a strictly ceremonial receiving line. As Catherine stepped into the grand ballroom, royal analysts noticed a profound shift in her presentation. She moved not just as the Princess of Wales, but as the undeniable matriarch in waiting, operating with a sovereign confidence that can only be wielded by someone who knows the institution is finally secure. Resting against her collarbone was a breathtaking piece of royal history, a spectacular diamond and pearl necklace that had once been the defining signature of Princess Diana. The sudden reappearance of this specific jewelry was not a coincidence. In the hyper-calculated world of royal optics, where every gemstone is a forensic message, this was Prince William executing a silent, flawless victory. He was publicly restoring his mother's legacy, protecting his wife's rightful place, and reminding the world exactly whose bloodline dictates the future of the crown. The reappearance of the necklace was accompanied by a chilling realization for Camilla. The British monarchy is not a family business that can be hijacked by a clever strategist. It is a 1,000-year-old machine designed to protect its own survival at all costs. It can be temporarily influenced and it can be momentarily distracted by the affections of a sovereign, but it can never be permanently captured by an outsider. Camilla spent 30 years playing a brilliant, ruthless game of public relations chess to secure the title of queen. She believed that controlling the man meant controlling the empire. But what she failed to realize until she stared at a flashing red security keypad is that the crown is ultimately governed by the ledger, the bloodline, and the protocol. Prince William simply waited for the exact right moment, allowed her to overextend her grasp on the king's constitutional duties, and then used the very bureaucratic machinery she thought she controlled to quietly strip her of her actual power. He did not destroy her in the press. He destroyed her in the administrative schedules. He exposed the staggering institutional desperation hiding behind her carefully curated PR machine, and he proved with cold, devastating restraint that the illusion of absolute power evaporates the moment the real gatekeepers change the locks. Thank you for exploring this deep dive into the hidden power dynamics of the British royal family. If you found this forensic analysis compelling, please subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments below on how the institution handles those who reach too far.